Good morning, everybody. What a lot of people in a confined space. Do feel free to take off your ties, I might shortly, and your jackets and make yourselves at home. My name is Paul King. I'm the Chief Executive of the UK Green Building Council. I'm delighted to see so many people here. I think we may be exceeding health and safety limits, but never mind. Really excited about today, and I hope you're going to enjoy a slightly different sort of event. Bit of housekeeping. I have no idea whether there are any planned fire alarms, but if there are, we'll be asking for our money back, I should think, so I'm not really expecting any. Also, I will encourage you to keep your mobile phone switched on. You will see up there, for the Twitter happy amongst you, we have our hashtag for this event, so feel free to sit and tweet to your heart's content. Alternatively, you can catch up on your emails, and we'll take that as a different form of feedback. But please do it quietly. Ideally, keep your phones and other devices on silent. I think that would be good for everybody. That's the formal housekeeping bits and pieces out of the way. As I say, this has been a project with a bit of a difference. But it made me think, when I was thinking about coming back to this venue, of a conference that we put on, really the only conference we've ever put on, in fact, in November 2009. It was in the other room across the hall there. And I remember standing up at some point there, launching a sort of rhetorical target to the members of the Green Building Council and the wider built environment industry. And I said, I think we need to be looking at a carbon reduction target for this sector of 50% in the next decade. And everybody, oh, you know, that's a big target. And of course, we, particularly male environmentalists, like big targets. You know, there's a certain amount of carbon target envy that goes on. But of course, you know, as with all good things, and if this isn't too smutty, it's not the size of the target, it's what you do with it that counts. And since then, we've been thinking, well, actually, what does need to happen about this and some very other serious challenges? But time moved on and things began to change. Before things changed too much, I met Paul Morell, who I'm delighted to say is here somewhere today, who had just been given the job of the government's chief construction advisor. And I'd met him shortly after he had had a meeting with Peter Mandelston, who was then Secretary of State, who had given him the unenviable challenge of leading the low carbon construction IGT, which stands for Innovation and Growth Team, which is interesting if you think about low carbon, innovation and growth. And I said to Paul, I said, God, you know, the industry's been waiting for you for years, and has been storing up all of these needs and demands of you, and now you've been given this great task to do. How are you going to sort of square that circle? How are you going to manage low carbon and everything else that the industry wants? And he said, and I've said this many times, but I think it just sort of tripped off his tongue, but he said, well, I'll view carbon as a proxy for innovation. And I thought, that's actually quite profound. I rather like that idea. And it's something we've talked about on and off ever since. He went on, of course, to lead the low carbon construction IGT team. And about a year later, of course, they produced a report. And in the introduction to that report, Paul wrote, over the next 40 years, the transition to low carbon can almost be read as a business plan for construction, bringing opportunities for growth. And I welcome that, and I was encouraged by that, because there aren't many people who view it that way. And I suppose it was in that way that we started thinking a little bit differently about, well, what does it take to stimulate innovation in a sector that often is described as rather lacking in innovation, rather riven with silos and different disciplinary priorities and what have you. So I thought there's an interesting opportunity. Then, of course, the government responded to the report from the IGT. And we were all actually a bit taken aback when Mark Priss stepped up and said, well, I now want to create a green construction board. And I want it to be jointly populated by government and leading industry people. And this isn't just one of those sort of ministerial whims. I want to be personally very involved in it, and I'd like to co-chair it. And so we have a Green Construction Board, which is co-chaired by Mark Priss, Minister for Construction in Biz, and also Dan Labad, the CEO of Lendlease. And you'll be hearing from Dan a little bit later on this morning. Mark Prisk wanted to be here this morning personally, but our timing was rather bad, and of course, ministers are still in recess. So instead, he sent us a little video message, which I'd like to share with you now.
Hello. I'm sorry I can't be with you today, but I want to congratulate the whole team on the development of Plan for Growth. It's absolutely right that we need to be thinking outside of the box and challenging the way in which the construction industry works, both now and for the future. Now, I'm under no illusions that this last 3 or 4 years has been one of the toughest on record the industry has faced. It has been a consistently challenging environment. And what we in government are trying to do, as well as dealing with our own deficit, is make sure that we create the long-term framework that enables the construction industry to flourish in the future. That's why we put in place the very first National Infrastructure Plan. It's why we're putting in place over £700 million worth to get Britain building. And it's particularly why I, working with Francis Maud, have been looking to ensure that we reform the way in which public procurement works, particularly through the use of BIM. And that's exactly the kind of innovative thinking that I'm pleased to say I can see in the Plan for Growth you're debating today. Now, of course, one of the crucial opportunities for the UK construction sector is to build on its existing competitive advantages in the field of sustainable construction and sustainable development. We wanted to make sure that when the growth strategy for sustainable development was completed, that we had an effective board that could drive that forward in terms of positive action. That's what the Green Construction Board is all about, and I'm very grateful to all of the board members, especially my co-chair Dan Labad, for leading in this field to make sure that we focus on outcomes and practical actions so we maintain the UK's competitive edge. And in a sense, the fact that 1/3 of all the potential actions identified by the original Green Growth Strategy have actually been implemented gives you some idea of the practical approach we're trying to take. But there is a lot more that needs to be done. Now, what I welcome in the programme, the Plan for Growth, is the concept of delivering a much greater collaborative approach. We've reflected that, of course, in the way in which we're looking at procurement in the public sector. But collaboration between public and between private and private is also an important theme. And I noticed that some of the actions proposed in the Plan for Growth reflect on that collaborative model. So I look forward to hearing more about the outcome from your deliberations today, and I wish you a very successful conference.
Thank you, Minister. And as I said, we'll be hearing from Dan Labad, the co-chair of the Green Construction Board, towards the end of the morning with a few thoughts of his own. Now, I've been, I suppose, working in and around sustainability issues for a while now, about 20 years, I guess. And we sometimes tie ourselves in knots in terms of thinking about what sustainability really means. And I was speaking at a conference recently, and suddenly it sort of came to me that actually it's profoundly simple. If we think of sustainability as really just being about enabling future generations to meet their needs. It follows from that then sustainable business is really about thinking about how we're going to meet our future customers' needs. And if we're not thinking about that, then surely we ought to ask ourselves, what are we doing in business? And indeed, how long we might be there if we're not meeting the needs of our future customers. And I think that really is the way I'd like to frame this project and this event this morning, and get your thoughts and reactions to that as we go on. Now, in terms of meeting the needs of future customers, we have a particular conundrum in this sector. I was talking to somebody the other day, and we were saying, you know, look at the IT world, think back 10 or 15 years, look at it today, it's unrecognisable, highly unpredictable. Where will we be in 10 or 15 years? Who knows? But it'll be somewhere very different. We look at our built environment, it gives us a slightly different challenge. We look ahead to Britain in 2050, and what we find is that over 80% of it is already built. The 26 million homes, the 18 million non-domestic buildings are buildings that we're occupying today. We're going to be occupying the same built environment, more or less. Now that's a bit of a problem, because at the same time, on the same time scale, we're attempting to do things like reduce carbon emissions by at least 80%. Now, if you look at the timeline of our carbon emissions, what you find is that 80% reduction by 2050 equals carbon emissions 200 years earlier in 1850. So we're going to have a situation where 80% of the built environment is the same. People, however, are going to be very different and expecting a 21st century quality of life, emitting carbon emissions equivalent to 200 years earlier, and dealing with a myriad of other resource constraints right across the economy. That's a hell of a nut to crack. It implies that, therefore, even if our built environment looks disarmingly familiar and similar 10, 20, 30 years down the road, the industry that underpins it may be almost unrecognizable. And that's the idea that we've been playing with. Now, change is hard, and people have known change is hard for an awfully long time. Back in the 16th century, Machiavelli made this observation, that change, profound change, is hard because, of course, there are always people doing rather well out of the way things are right now. And the lone voices on the sideline saying, maybe we should do it a bit different, tend to be lone voices on the sideline, often unheard by the large present incumbents. But of course things do change. You'll see in the report the example that many of you will be familiar with of Kodak. What happened to the Kodak moment? Did they see, when the man in Kodak invented the digital camera back in 1972, actually the full consequences? Of course they didn't. And of course, we've seen what's happened to that company. So change is hard. So we thought, well, how can we begin in this sector to think about how we could precipitate a different sort of mindset? So we created a metaphor. And we said, imagine all of your companies, those of you who work for companies in the built environment, were bought up by an enormous conglomerate called UK Built Environment PLC. And having bought all of your companies and many more besides, the board sat down and said, okay, what's the plan? What are we going to do differently? Yes, we can instinctively sense that there's things that we can do to integrate horizontally and vertically across our supply chain, across the building life cycle, given the breadth of our operating companies. But actually, what's going to change? So what we did was, over a 6-month period, we pulled together what we called our innovation and integration team. We pulled together about 50 people, many of them in this room, from across the members of the UK-GBC, and we got them to work together. And in classic strategic planning style, we got them together to undertake a pest analysis, to scan the horizon and say what's going to change politically, economically, socially, technologically. Out of that, we developed scenarios, building on the work of the Foresight program a couple of years ago. We developed scenarios. What would it look like if we were operating in this environment? How would the assumptions that underpin the way we do business fundamentally today change or have to change in that future? And then we began working with 100% Open and others to tease out some innovative ideas. The sorts of ideas which you might then expect to have presented back to the board of UK Built Environment PLC saying, we think these are some ideas that we should be starting to incubate, to develop, to take over where some of our existing businesses will fade and die over time. So that's what this project's been all about. We couldn't have done it without support from sponsors for this project, and I'm incredibly grateful to Aggregate Industries, E.ON, Heathrow Airport, Mitsubishi Electric and Technology Strategy Board for their support over the last 6 months, which has been invaluable in making this project possible. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you another video, a film that we've made that kind of captures the essence of this project, what we've done, how we did it, and some of the ideas that have emerged. And what I'd urge you to do is think about not just the ideas specifically, but the themes, the insights really that sit behind those ideas. Because then we'll be hearing from a panel of very distinguished keynote listeners. We'll be exploring the ideas in a little bit more detail, and then we'll be coming back and asking for your reactions. So if we may, we'll cue the video.
challenge of sustainability for those of us operating in the built environment is really not to be underestimated. Some fairly substantial change is going to happen to the business models that currently exist, or a number of us are going to be falling by the wayside.
And I think businesses that don't adapt, they won't be around in 10, 15 years' time, or certainly they won't be doing particularly well.
What might some of the new and innovative commercial ideas be? We're looking for the commercial opportunities that could represent a plan for growth. UK-GBC and over 50 representatives from member organisations have been on a journey over the last few months. We've scanned the future operating environment and we've taken a look at the political, economic, social and technological trends and drivers, really challenging assumptions about the way we currently do business and working with innovation experts to gain insight into potential areas for growth.
It's relatively easy to come up with evolutionary, small-scale stuff. It's actually quite hard to come up with big, new ideas. And I'll tell you why it's hard. Because to come up with the big ideas, we have to question the assumptions that govern our operating mindset. And those assumptions are usually things that have allowed businesses that exist now to be extremely successful. We're going to take you on a process which is designed to help you think the unthinkable.
Actually, to just sit down and to brainstorm with a whole group of colleagues from across the industry, having discussions with clients and developers in a context that I wouldn't normally have, and just say, what is the potential, what could we be doing and how could we be doing it?
And what was interesting is that it allowed us to see that the assumptions that we were using were outdated, and that things have moved on. Social networking is here and people communicate in a different way, they expect answers on a different time frame. So it was really useful to do that because it enabled us to generate new ideas once we put our old ideas, our old assumptions behind us.
The result is that you do draw on other people's experiences and build on them and end up in thinking things that you wouldn't have thought normally.
And I think it's that heterogeneous feel that process had that really got us to a point where we had some ideas that could be taken forward.
And 5 projects have come forward to be the key ones, which are going to have the most credibility and have got the best chance of success, but at the same time being a radical step forward over what is currently available.
The ideas that we're developing now may be the test bed for some other exciting ideas, or these may be the ideas that get followed through and get developed, and I think that'd be brilliant. I think anything that challenges the industry to work better, more intelligently, gets us all talking to each other and can come out with a tangible product that then rolls out across the industry for everybody, I think can only be a good thing.
At this moment in time, it's very easy to keep your head down, work harder, but actually there's also a case for standing up, looking up and saying what could be done differently, and that's what this project does.
I really hope that businesses can see that there is business in operating in a different way, and we can take this forward.
And hopefully, if it works out, we'll be bearing the fruits of it in the next 5, 10, 15 years as the economy strengthens and improves.
Good. Well, relevant ideas, trivial ideas, game changers, tweaking at the margins. Interested in your views, and I'll be asking you for your views in a little while. But first of all, I want to invite our keynote listeners. So if I can ask you to come along and join us up on the tables on the far side. I'd like to welcome Mark Clare, CEO of Barrett Developments, Ed Gillespie, co-founder of Futera Communications, Dr. Paul Golby, former CEO from E.ON UK, Sarah Lonsdale from The Telegraph, and Annie von Bradsky, chairman of PRP Architects. You're very welcome. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning in your role as keynote listeners. What we're going to do now is I'm going to ask colleagues from within our innovation and integration team of UK Built Environment PLC to come up here one at a time, or in the first case, two at a time, to just expand a little bit on the 5 ideas that you saw rapidly fleet across the screen a few minutes ago. They're going to flesh out the idea a little bit more, and then I'm going to look for some comment and some feedback from our listeners. We'll run through the ideas and then we're going to open it up to all of you. So first up, we have community collaborators, Marko Marjevich and Duncan Price. Please take the podium.
Thank you, Paul. Okay. So we get 2.5 minutes of fame each.
That's it. And as you can see, we've followed Paul's guidance and discarded our ties. So, bit of an Ant and Dec style double act today. I'll leave you to decide which one of us is Ant or Dec. Perhaps you can even tweet it. So, community collaborators. Just wanted to lift the lid on the animation that you saw earlier. Well, the background to this idea and in developing this business concept, what we observed is there's a number of cooperatively owned schemes that have already got off the ground, supported by institutions such as Energy for All and the Cooperative Enterprise Hub, just to name but 2. But we've also observed a number of barriers that are preventing this sort of model moving from boutique to mass market. I just want to briefly outline some of those barriers that we identified. First and foremost, schemes of this nature lack economies of scale, and therefore, compared to a large-scale offshore wind farm, lack perhaps the bangs for buck that institutional investors may be looking for. In addition to this, the lack of standardization across of these types of projects, given the variety and the different circumstances in which they're deployed, leads to increased costs. There's also a tension that we observed between the commercial direction, which the project may need to be taken in, and also the collaborative nature of the project and the difficulty in reconciling those 2 elements, as well as finally the difficulty in attracting third-party finance and the expertise needed to actually take these projects from off the drawing board and into the ground. So what are we selling? What's the proposition? Well, in simple terms, it's a one-stop shop that really provides a vehicle through which communities can actually interface with an organisation that can help them take their ideas and wishes for a community energy scheme through to fruition by combining private sector expertise to help reduce the cost and complexity of taking a community energy scheme forward. And essentially, from a back office perspective, this community collaborator entity is there to bring together the expertise to provide a standardized offering which will help to reduce the cost of that project, as well as offering something which could be standardized and scaled up across a region. I'm now going to hand over to Duncan for the science part.
Essentially, there's 2 parts of the funding mechanism that goes along with this. There's a development fund for getting projects through planning to the point where you're about to start building, and there's a capital investment fund. And the pre-development fund we see as quite a crucial part of sharing risk with local communities. And to give you some sense of it, if there was a 50-50 split of investment in taking projects through planning to the point where they get to financial close, then if community collaborators could underwrite 50% of the pre-development costs, then we think the sort of scale of ambition that we need to get disruptive behaviour in this sector requires about £27 million over 10 years. And that would be enough to deliver 1 gigawatt of new capacity, which is about a third of the latent potential for small-scale energy projects across the UK. To give an example here, just about £400,000 of capital investment into a community wind turbine could yield annual revenues of £52,000, which is about a 7% rate of return. And there's a margin there between the cost of borrowing money and the cost of lending money, and that margin can help to fund the next development exercise and the next development exercise. Just to give you a sense, we think that £27 million could unlock £300 million of junior debt and £1 billion of senior debt from pension funds and commercial banks, and deliver emission reductions of 1.5 million tonnes of CO2 per annum. So the potential is enormous. The key challenge, though, is that you've got these high and disproportionately high pre-development costs compared with larger projects. So for the banks and so on, there's an opportunity cost of investing in this kind of project rather than an offshore wind farm. And also because community projects are developed as one-off schemes, they don't have that expertise on hand. So if you can aggregate these, if you can genuinely get some economies of scale and genuinely get some standardisation, then we think that you can unlock this market. Just one idea is that the Green Investment Bank could have a key role to play there. It's not dissimilar to the way that the Green Investment Bank may be putting money into the Green Deal Finance Company in order to achieve the same kind of aggregation of small-scale energy projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Okay. Now, I have to keep this moving fairly swiftly, so I'm not going to come to all of our expert listeners for all of the ideas straight away, but I'd like to kick off, perhaps rather obviously, with Dr. Paul Colby, who until very recently ran a very large energy company. Paul, what do you think? Is this filling at the edges, or is this a potential game changer?
I think this could be quite significant. We all see the power of local communities. Yesterday, of course, stopping a wind farm in the High Court. And I think why do people do that is because there's no benefit for them. It's something being done to them. So I think the power of this idea is something that they want to do themselves. And I think the key is that standardisation, commoditisation, if you like, because a lot of the cost of these projects is common. Yes, it's the analogy I would use is it's no different from you buying a Mercedes and saying, I want green and I want this kind of dock, iPad dock, and I want this product, etc. So you can commoditise this. And quite frankly, I was amazed at the low number, 27 million. When I was looking at building nuclear power stations, it was 7 billion. So 27 million over 10 years to get something like this started, I think is really a very, very low cost indeed. And I think Green Investment Bank or some organisation like that, this actually is worth a punt, if I can describe it that way.
Thank you, Paul. Ed, if I can come to you. I mean, behind this idea sits a much broader theme, which comes out hopefully in the report that people have a chance to look at. And that is around community and the way in which we see a new era of communities coming together, combining their collective bargaining power to meet their needs. Does this resonate with you and work you're doing in other sectors?
Oh, completely. I mean, I think the exciting thing about this sort of customer-led collaboration is the fact that it is already happening. There's a great quote from the sci-fi writer William Gibson who said, "The future's here, it's just not evenly distributed yet." And actually, but you can have examples of all sorts of projects which have been doing this for some time. In Brixton, where I live, we've got Brixton Solar Energy Cooperative. I was an investor in the West Mills Wind Farm Cooperative. You've got the People's Supermarket, which is now trying to replicate its model elsewhere, and people expressing interest in that internationally. There's the Trillion Fund, which is now launching for sort of crowdsourced renewable energy investment, where all of us can put 500 quid in and become renewable energy investors at scale. So in that context, I think the 27 million quid, as Paul said, when we're talking about £100 million to cancel the pasty tax, this looks like a bargain.
Thank you. And Mark, I can't resist coming to you because, of course, you used to run quite a large energy company as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important part of this is how you engage communities, because I think that's the one thing that we need to really drive carbon reduction, and I think that's the key. Can we really bring them in? We mustn't forget about energy efficiency, so it's not just about building wind turbines, because most of our existing stock actually could benefit from refit rather than, I know we've got the Green Deal for that, but let's not just focus on putting in new kit. One of the thoughts I had when I saw this is, of course, the allowable solutions is something that house builders will start to pay into as we go towards the higher code levels. And wouldn't it be great for house builders who effectively have to engage with communities to do what they do, who have the expertise to deliver this now, because that's what we're doing all the time, to actually use the allowable solutions money to create these sort of solutions. So there's another form of capital potentially there.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Marco, come and take a seat with us up the end here. Duncan, just keep on standby in case we need you in a bit. All right, I'm going to come on to our next idea. You design and build. Jane Brigginshaw from the HCA is going to present this idea. Jane.
Negotiating the stairs.
Yeah.
Morning, everybody. I'm absolutely delighted to be supporting this plan for growth, this particular plan for growth. And I think the proposition that I'm going to be introducing once I've got my yellow bit of paper in the right place is another one, and maybe more than any of the others, type of captures the zeitgeist of the moment. So it's very much in keeping, I think, with the art of the possible. Let's get on to the first slide. Now, our very own housing minister is very excited about this type of thing, about self-build at the moment. He sees a huge untapped potential in the self-build market. There's many good things about it, and this picture is on his recent trip to Almere in the Netherlands, and it type of sums up the liveliness and the colour of this proposition in the Netherlands. But in this country there are barriers, and one of the many challenges is whether this self-build stuff that's going on can actually be sustainable. And our proposition is all about how it can be sustainable and how it can be possible. Here we go. There we are. Now, we're working in the HCA. I come from the HCA, and we're very keen to support this type of thing. And actually, we're working very positively with government to take out some of the sort of practical financial barriers. But this proposition talks about how we actually do it. And what we're proposing is that you can have an end-to-end product. The design is sorted out for you. The difficulties are sorted out for you. Planning constraints, and crucially, access to land. I think the expert listeners will understand that access to land is one of the things that's been holding back this untapped potential. You can choose your design, and you can get to live in a green and conscious place. That's the big sell, and we think that's going to be very popular. In terms of costs, the untapped potential that we really believe is there. At the moment, the self-build market is tiny, and the government aims to double that. So we believe that this part of the proposition will be so attractive that people want to be part of self-build, but they'll be prepared to pay a little bit extra money to build to this high standard of sustainability. And it's so attractive. We've seen grand designs, but everybody thinks, oh, that's not for me, I can't possibly afford it. But we believe it's attractive. You get the place you want to live, and you get the type of place you want to live, and it's fantastic, and it's made for you. Upfront costs. There will be costs. There'll be land acquisition, development finance, web tool development, and we believe there will be external investors required. But the type of work that I was talking about before that we're doing with government is taking out, in reality, and we're going to be launching some things very soon, in reality that is taking out a lot of these very real problems. So we believe it's absolutely possible, and this type of extra thing that we're offering, the special design premium, will be very popular. So the key challenges, again, we can't avoid this problem of access to suitable, affordable land. And we're in the HCA working on how to get public land to people, but it remains a problem. And I think those of you in the panel who work on these type of things will know that land is the big premium. It wasn't always like that in this country. It wasn't always the case, but right now that is the problem. Lenders see it as risky. Again, some of the work we're doing is taking out these risks, but it's perceived as a sort of rather difficult thing, rather weird, tricky. Why go there in a very unstable environment? And upfront capital's needed. I think one of the biggest risks, and it's the work we do and we see all the time, we build communities, but getting it right and getting people to live together and enjoy living together and to want to bring up their children there in 30 years hence and so on, that's one of the biggest risks. So we can design a beautiful place, a great place where people to live, but it's getting the right people in and getting them to want to stay that's also part of this building a sustainable community. So that's the living in harmony bit. And finally, the challenge and also the opportunity is the countercultural one. I was reading a rather boring highbrow book that I was boring Sally from Gentoo about, and it said that from the 17th century onwards, we started speculation in this country, and the speculation, we were first in Europe really to do this, and that was building without clients, and you had to standardise for doing that. So this is going completely against this. This is against standardisation, this is customisation, for which we think people will pay a premium. So it's countercultural, we're sort of turning assumptions on their head, but we think there's a huge potential in it. So I hope you see the potential, and I hope the expert listeners will be able to invest in it and think that it's a great idea. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jane. Stay there for a second. So, Andy, you're an architect. You run a big firm of architects. Is it a good idea? Do we want to let people loose designing their own homes? And in fact, more seriously, is it really feasible for us to revolutionise self-build in this country?
Well, I think this is an idea which has its time. It really is going to come to the fore. We know that it's been pushed in all sorts of areas of policy, so we know it's going to happen. The idea of people self-helping, the idea of self-building, much greater awareness as a consequence of that about the performance of your building, much greater awareness of the low carbon issues, the running costs and so on and so forth. My only hesitation around it, and I have a hesitation, is that firstly it's not a panacea for the issues that we're dealing with. I think it's part of a mix of a number of things that we need to deal with. A lot is referred to in Europe about how they operate, and the issue there is about how the infrastructure, how the plot becomes serviced in the first place, and the necessity, I think, for government to play a role in that. And I haven't heard enough, I suppose, to convince me that there is that willingness to invest. I think the issue about scale comes to mind. How do we achieve scale with it? And I think, but I do think it's possible if the local authorities, if the government can make this land available. I think it's got legs. I think the private developer sector could play a role in this as well by offering land that it would develop normally under Section 106, so there are possibilities there. But it really does need a joined-up approach between funding, land availability, and local authority involvement, in my view. The thing that really excites me about it, and a lot of the ideas that we've seen coming forward have been around web-based tools, and that's really is happening already. The number of people who shop and customise their own homes by shopping through the web is growing by the day, I would say. And I don't think it will be long before, rather than self-build, house builders will be delivering shells which then get customised. And I think that's a form of self-build that I can see happening to a greater degree. So more customisation, perhaps less self-build, as it were. That's my view.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Andy. Mark from Barrett's. A threat, an opportunity, or pie in the sky? Or what do you think?
I knew you were going to ask me, so... look, there's some... the fundamental point here is if we could provide, as an industry, as the wider industry, customers with more choice of what they live in, I think it would be brilliant. It would be a massive step forward. So I think that the real key point here is the idea that we can provide all customers with more choice is great. I think it's a good way of energising smaller sites, because I think that's where the real focus of attention would be here. You might imagine that I can see some pitfalls here. I think the supply chain has to be very robust. It has to deliver high quality product. Obviously this is done overseas, so you can actually effectively buy your own house from the supermarket almost. I think we have to watch the cost, because what we have to have in this country is affordable housing. And I know how much it costs to do bespoke, because we do bespoke, and I can tell you it's dramatically more than the cost of building standard housing. I think there is a big finance piece here. I mean, the lenders will want to see the finished product. It wants to get the NHBC guarantees and everything else. But the single biggest challenge we have in this country, let's be very clear, is planning. There is no way I could build those houses on a site unless they all look like that, I suspect. Well, in fact, I still couldn't do it. We have to absolutely define every single house that we plot on a site. What it looks like, the planners will often interfere with that, maybe rightly. What house type it is, how large it is. And to change one plot on a site of 100, we have to go back through a planning permission process. So actually, the big idea is open that up. Give us the ability to customise houses, so we can say to the customer, you decide where you want the house. We have 200 house types. We have all sorts of different house types. So I can see a massive potential to unlock this market. So I'm sort of going much, much bigger than just the self-build. I'm saying, why don't we apply this idea to the whole industry? That would be incredibly radical. My concern is we've just been through the MPPF and we did not see the sort of changes that we were hoping there that makes it easier to do this sort of thing. So, all right, big opportunity, big challenge.
Well, thanks for that. And I mean, among our audience today, we've got directors from Friends of the Earth and Wildlife Trust, as well as many people from the industry, and I hope to get some different points of view. The other thing I think on this one is to say that although, again, this was a specific idea, a much broader insight that comes through from the project is one of putting customers at the centre. Customers demanding increasingly to be at the centre, to be more in control, having a greater say about what they get, and that's something else I'd like to pick up on in a bit.
Can I just come back on one of those points?
You may very quickly.
I mean, Mark, I think I completely agree with you, and I'm glad you picked up the planning, because we didn't really focus on that. But Andy, your point about master planning, that's one of the things that concerns me the most about this whole piece of work. In the Netherlands from 1975, they understood that profoundly, that you needed to sort out the area and the community, and that's what I was trying to touch on, living in harmony. It's no good doing a beautiful one-off house. It's got to be infrastructure put in, and how we're to do that before this comes in is the big unanswered question with the government. So I really thank you for that.
Thank you, Jane.
Comment.
Jane, take a seat next to Marco. Apologies that I have to keep us rolling fairly swiftly here. The next idea is livable spaces. Sally, could you come and tell us more?
Good morning, delighted to be here and talk to you about this idea. As Paul has talked about putting the customer at the heart of things, I think this idea you'll see really is about not the customer being at the heart of it, but the customer being in charge of it. In terms of background, what did we talk about? Where did this idea come from? We were talking about what's really important to people when they're searching for a home, either to buy or to rent. And the fact that it may not always be as obvious as you would think. So how did a stork get on the top of a telegraph pole? Don't birds roost in trees? Was there something different that the stork was looking for that we just weren't aware of? And we talked about how people find a home and what the traditional model says, which is a to-let board. So the stork would have never found his home if he'd just looked on the to-let and for sale boards, but he might have found it on Twitter or Facebook. And so things are changing, and we need to change, and we need to look forward and see how we can effect change in the future. And we saw an unmet need for, you may have seen the front page of the Metro this morning, for information on energy prices, for information on the energy efficiency of a property, for information on transport and travel. So we saw a whole lot of stuff that is kind of around us, but nobody's pulling together. So that was the background. What's the proposition? On the left here, the proposition is, it's great living here, all my mates are here, really handy for work, I grow my own food, I also contribute to the community because I give a bit of food back. It's a very sustainable way to live. And so the proposition is that actually when you're looking for a home, you're not looking for a property, you're looking for a lifestyle. And that's what the bees get, they get a lifestyle. Traditional estate agents, traditional models have previously been about property. And still, to a large extent, I was talking to a junior member of my staff just last week, and he said, looking for a place, every site I go onto forces me to put how many bedrooms I want in first. That's the first thing you have to do. You may be able to say, and I know some organisations do green filters. One of the panellists hosts a site that where you can look for green credentials to your property, but you have to put how many bedrooms you want in very early in the process. It's not possible to say, I just want to live 10 minutes from, or in Duncan's case, 45 minutes from town. So what we saw was the opportunity to bring together information in one place and not to force people down the route of always looking at property first. A web-based portal where you'd get EPC data, you'd get energy bill data, you'd get transport links, information about the community, and so that you could construct your lifestyle as well as purchase or rent your home. And something which would really be able to take people's views into account. So this is a hamster kind of dwelling on the right for those who are a bit confused. I get to live next door to my mum. She's just close enough, but I can close the door in between if I need to. I get to generate all of my own energy on this wheel, which keeps me fit as well. Great facilities for the kids. And what we would do on this site is we would get the hamster family to say how they felt about it. So as TripAdvisor is successful because people do tell you what they think, then so would this site be because it would be user generated. And we would build it up, the proposition suggests that we would build it up with pioneers, so transition towns, colleges and universities that are really keen on this stuff. And that we would link to other sites and not be seen as a challenge. I didn't have Duncan to help me with the costs. So what I'd like to do is encourage you to see this as a product which is the glue in the UK Built Environment PLC basket of offers. It's something which will add value to all of the other products that we have as that UK PLC business. So if we do have greener properties, if we do have design and build, where will they be advertised? How will people access them? It's through this idea. And there is the potential for growth as user-generated feedback starts to come in, then more businesses will wish to advertise, and then there'll be more to comment on, and it can grow and it can grow and grow. And in the very early stages, it'll be a low risk, low cost, because we're talking about a web-based portal, maybe an app. We're talking about some design that can be covered by advertising costs. So what are the key challenges, risks and assumptions? Well, the key assumption that we made is on the left-hand side that sustainability is going to be more in focus. Whether that's people being more interested because they want to be, or whether it's because energy bills are going up. The key assumption is that people will want to come back. So people will return to this site. And the key risk is that it's not updated, there is poor quality data, and there is also a risk that it can be copied.
Thank you very much, Annie. Thank you. Sarah, you write on property, amongst other things, for the Telegraph. Do you see anything in this idea?
Yes, I mean, I think obviously the location of the community is absolutely vital when people come to buy a house. I mean, when I get letters from readers, their biggest fear at the moment is smart meters, but second to that is is buying somewhere in the wrong place. They think they like the house, and then they find out that the neighbours are dodgy or the school's not great, and that kind of thing. So I think, you know, superficially it sounds like a very good idea. I think just one or two things to mention. People are still very unsure of sort of low carbon jargon, and so I think it needs to be very, very simple. So words like carbon neutral mean nothing to readers. You have to explain that, you know, this house is going to have fuel bills 10% of a conventional house, that kind of thing. I'm a bit wary of your comparison with TripAdvisor, just because there's been an awful lot of problems with people with axes to grind, putting stuff up. So you need to have a very good filter system on that. But I think the key thing really, and I don't know how this would work, is meshing the virtual with the real. So, I mean, I've done a lot of stories recently on community action groups, people getting together via the internet to campaign against, I mean, the one I did last week was campaigning against Network Rail chopping trees down, and they were very, very successful. The key to their success was they got lots and lots of online activists joining email groups and things, but the key to their success is when the public meeting was held, they burst through the walls. There were so many of them. And I just wonder whether there could be, you know, with these interested groups like Transition Towns, you know, there could be somehow a link that people could then actually directly speak to people in the communities, as well as just seeing a write-up. You know, they need to actually talk to somebody to make sure that it's not just an online troll, you know, trying to mislead them or something like that.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think you've also just illustrated perfectly, again, the wider theme here, which is about people acting in different sorts of communities, hungry for a different sort of community, but also wanting to act in different sort of communities, whether that's in an activist way or a purchasing way or whatever it may be. Ed, you know a thing or two about communicating some of this green stuff to ordinary folk. What do you think?
Well, firstly, I want a house with a hamster wheel. I mean, I think the positioning of this, I mean, as we've already sort of highlighted, it's really about being better. You know, the livability thing, it's one of the biggest decisions you ever make in your life about where you're going to live. And I remember being sort of slightly taken aback a couple of years ago where a new guy bought the flat below me, and he actually took the trouble to knock on my door and come and say hello and said, "What's it like to live here?" And I was like, no one's ever done that before. Yeah. You know, and you'd think that would be the most basic thing we could do. So this type of service, I think, would be invaluable for that sort of level of insight, because you do want to know what it's like to live in that neighbourhood rather than just looking at the house. You know, so you know, if you're going to move to Chipping Norton, you want to know what the neighbours are going to be like, and are they going to be insufferable bores with overgrown wisteria? But you know, so it's that sort of stuff, and I think to a certain extent, some of the media are already doing this as well. So you know, if it's already started, you know, like the Guardian weekend magazine has Let's Move To. And you know, the housing bit comes at the end, but actually it's all about talking about the town and the amenities and what's there, and interviewing people on the street about what they like about it. So I think this is a great interactive, crowdsourced portal which would do exactly the same thing.
And so if Rightmove came knocking on Futura Communications' door and said, "We've heard a bit about this thing. Do you think there's anything in this?" You know, is it a mainstream thing or is it a niche thing?
No, I think it could be mainstream. When you look at, I mean, again, flipping a trend on its head, you look how phenomenally successful the book Crap Towns was. You know, so there's an interest in, you know, people wanting to sort of mock stuff, but actually we'd be flipping on its head and going, these are great places to live, and this is why.
Thank you very much. I'm going to keep us going. Sally, take a seat, and I will come back and allow our panellists and others to comment in a bit. The next idea is not that one. The next idea is this one. Great home, no hassle. David Adams, come and tell us more.
Thank you, Paul. Great homes, no hassle. Well, a little bit of background. We know, many of us know that feeling when you've bought your first home, perhaps, and you're given the front door key, you open the front door for the first time. Of course, that's the moment of euphoria. For many people, sorry about the quality, that top rung that first rung is a very high rung indeed. It shocked me. 37 was the average age of a first-time buyer, with a deposit of £66,000. Stunning. And of course, the utopia is owning your home is the thing we do. We've kind of been, that's deeply embedded in the psychology. When you get there, I wonder if some of you feel a bit like that, because we tend to have 25-year mortgages, whatever that means, because we tend to switch them, but we move quite regularly, and the hassle involved in moving is high, the transaction costs are high, and we can feel quite locked in. Where do we go? Where is the flexibility within this model? So yes, it's prevalent, yes, we aspire to it, mostly, but it's certainly not perfect. Having said that, the alternative, renting, often is seen as money down the drain. There's no stake in that property, particularly if property prices are rising. Where's this taking me to? But I'm forced to rent because I can't get onto that first ladder. In terms of energy efficiency, where's the incentive? Yes, we've now got a minimum being suggested for the energy performance of homes from 2018 on in the private sector. That's how the performance is. 20% are F&G, 50% are E, F&G. Green Deal will help. Is it enough? Where is the market wanting to improve this? But of course, there are advantages of renting. Considerable amounts of flexibility. So we've got two models. They're very far apart. Can something be created in the middle? And that's what Great Homes No Hassle is all about. So proposition, a scheme provider purchases the property. The property you, as the potential householder, wishes to live in. There's a flexible payment plan set up. What's that covering? That's covering an equity stake, capital repayment, and a service charge, including utility bills. So this is wrapping it together with the property brought up to a high level of energy efficiency, bearing in mind the scheme is expecting to hold this for a very long time, so therefore a long forward view. And bearing in mind through this route, and cunningly missed off the slide, in terms of your flexible payment plan, we're expecting very low or zero deposit. So you're not having to wait for building up that 66,000, and of course when you think about it, while you're trying to save that amount of money, even the interest on it is being taxed. And finally, so what happens when you move? You move and you're taking your savings pot with you. The scheme owns the house you've moved out of. You'd be moving into another home that's either owned by the scheme or to be owned by the scheme. And so this is building up the portfolio, and from a householder perspective, it's much more flexible. Transaction costs significantly lower, opportunities greater. And when you move, it's valued. So we're not linking out of the sort of property owning model. There's a value to that home, and that needs to be reflected. That drives responsibility, and that also drives benefits in terms of your savings pot increasing. So it's trying to combine a rental model and an owning model into a different shape, a middle way. Say you are in negative equity, that's one of the reasons for the very high deposit costs. Well, of course, where we've been through periods of negative equity in the past, if people had stayed in those properties, if they hadn't crystallised the debt, it does pull out of it over the longer term. And this whole idea is to be across a longer term but give flexibility within it. So costs and revenue, very, very quickly, because I'm conscious Paul's looking at me. Costs, of course, there are a range of costs here. It's not a panacea, but again, putting this into very much a standardized form of costs and getting mass market scale to it. And in terms of revenues back in from interest on finance, investment returns, and also margins made on construction, refurbishment, etc., etc. And this isn't trying to be anything radically different in terms of long-term. If you ran the current model on thinking very long-term, this is trying to crystallize that thought process. So Key challenges, risks and assumptions. Key question here, we're walking over probably some ice. Yeah, this is quite radically different. So how thick is the ice? What are the issues that need to be thought about as we go forward? And clearly this likely to need a large-scale institutional investor, management company looking after cost control, the refurbishment, the energy management, perhaps a mutual green building society or something like that. And a level of regulatory approval, because as a financing model, it is quite different. But can it be done? When we were working through this idea, actually it was Sally said, well, Gen 2 Genie is that. And actually I looked it up on the web a few weeks ago, and it's very similar indeed, and it goes to Ed's point. Actually, it's happening. I spoke to Sally earlier. 6 homes a week, is it currently being sold or provided through this route? And average age 26 of the person moving into the scheme. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. Have a seat. Just a bit of housekeeping. I'm delighted that people have got their mobile phones still switched on. But if I've got any frustrated tweeters in the house or anybody who does want to catch up on their emails, you do need to know, if you don't already, that the network is King's Place Events. And the password is Regents with a capital R, 12, Canal with a capital C. Regents, 12, Canal, capital R, capital C. Hopefully that will get you moving with your tweeting. Very good. Thank you, David. So coming to our panel, there's a couple of things here. I mean, one is we're talking about a radically different way of not renting, not owning, but of having the home that we want and financing it differently. The other thing is there a mechanism here by which we could really gain the economies of scale, the kind of volumes and the professionalism of upgrading our housing stock? I mean, Sally alluded to this, front page of the Metro today, 3 years' time, a third of households won't be able to afford their energy bills. So 2 pretty major issues there. Mark, what do you think? Is this a viable proposition?
No, I think the idea of a flexible tenure system, i.e. one that isn't just either you buy or you rent or you're in social housing, is something that we continue to try and push very hard. And I think you've got to try and open this up, because the old model isn't going to work, I suspect, in the environment that we're going to be in for the next 50 years. I think the idea of bundling the services, which ensures that the homes are maintained and brought up to the right standard, and you can adopt the latest energy efficiency standards, that's all good as well. The challenge is, where's the capital coming from? You do need institutional capital. We've been trying to get institutional capital into these sort of ideas for some time. Unfortunately, the institutions want to earn a good return. They have lots of places they can put their money, and therefore at the moment it's not really getting traction. But I mean, in terms of the idea, spot on, in my opinion, is something that we should all be trying to push for. One small point, under the new government's new buy scheme, of course, you'd only need a £10,000 deposit. I just wanted to do the plug there for new buy. But there are other options. But I think in terms of moving away from these fixed tenures, then absolutely right. Whether this is the right model, I think you need a lot of customer input to it. But it would be great to explore those options.
Thank you, Mark. I know Peter Ward's the Chief Exec from Gen 2's here, and I'm going to try and encourage him to share a couple of insights into the Genie model in a bit. But I want to come to Sarah. What's this look like to you? Can you imagine running a story in the Telegraph on this new scheme?
I think, particularly for Telegraph readers, the goal is, to have your castle and your drawbridge. But having said that, I think one of the big questions my readers would ask is, who shoulders the risk if things go wrong? What happens if the value of the property falls? What happens if there's shoddy building involved? That kind of thing. Still, I think, particularly today, so many of our readers are also telling us that, they've taken pension holidays because they can't afford them, and their homes are, their pensions, you know, what happens in the future when they downsize, when they move on, would be sort of questions I would have. But in terms of, I mean, it sounds quite exciting on the retrofit side, not so much for sort of new build, but perhaps taking in poorly constructed houses that were built in the 60s, 70s, which are so badly insulated, and perhaps mass retrofitting them. It sounds like perhaps potentially even better than a Green Deal solution.
Even better. Fantastic. And I mean, and one of the ideas that you'll see when it comes through in the report is actually the idea that you could actually join the scheme with your existing home. So you could effectively remortgage by taking your current home into the scheme, which is an interesting twist on this. Ed, did you want to come in quickly?
It has to be good because, you know, nothing can be worse than the mortgage bubble we had before. So, you know, that was such a financial disaster, you know, for the economy and globally as well, that actually any kind of mixed tenure model has to be more attractive.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, I'm going to move us on. I know, David, you'd be itching to come back on some of that, but I'm going to stop you for now. But I'm going to invite Chris Brown to come and present our final of the 5 ideas. Use space well. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Paul. This is about making better use of buildings. And I was very struck by Paul's Machiavelli quote earlier on. I'd just like a show of hands, if I may. Don't be shy. How many of you think you're in the construction industry? Show of hands. Can I just say I'm really sorry? Okay, so this is about the end of your industry. Remember Kodak. It's a very simple idea. So it's about collaborative consumption of buildings. It's actually quite an old idea. We've always done it with hotels and cafes. They're used by different people at different times of the day, the week, the year. It's also, in this digital age, a Me Too idea. It's an idea that's followed by people like Zipcar with car clubs, by people like Airbnb. And for those of you who don't know these references, in the document, there's a really helpful set of links to all these high-tech organizations who are using digital tools to create situations for collaborative consumption. So it's good for the planet. At the moment, we use many of our buildings to only about 30% of their capacity. Lots of office buildings empty at weekends, empty at night, empty during holidays, or part occupied. So this is about building no new buildings and also using the buildings we've got much more effectively so that we produce less carbon from them. It's good financially. It's good financially for the people who occupy the buildings. PwC, this is, again, as point, this is not necessarily new. PwC in their new More London office, that's an office for 6,000 people. It's got 4,500 workspaces, and it peaks at only 3,250 people in the building. It's actually averaging about 2,500 people. So PwC could have saved well over 50% of their office costs and well over 50% of their carbon costs. Our starting point is to create a marketplace, because not only is this good for occupiers, this is good for people who are presently commuting into work. 80 billion miles of commute per annum in the UK. It's a huge amount of carbon being produced, it's a huge amount of wasted time. So this is a web-based platform linking those people who want to find a local office that they can just go and use a bit of space for an hour or 3 with those companies where people are out of the office, they've got a spare desk, happy to get a bit of extra revenue in. It's not Regis. This is not new build serviced offices. This is making use of buildings that are already there. The financials on it, we've got a technology partner who's already running a website which does this. We charge 10% of the transaction costs as they go through. Airbnb, for those that don't know, is a £1.2 billion company. So when our customers are making money, we're making money. Competitive advantage here, as with something like Airbnb, comes from being first, getting to scale fast, like Zipcar. Quite a few people started. Zipcar had the capital to buy them all up as they developed, and are now the dominant player. There are barriers, though. Why would anyone want a stranger to come into their office? Well, you can imagine the guys at Airbnb were thinking, why would anyone want a stranger to come and use my bedroom? And yet it did, and they're incredibly successful. But we do need to get to that critical mass, and so what we'll be doing is selecting trial areas, free and doing the service for free in those areas to get examples that work quickly. And that's not the end of it. We can go a lot further. If we use hotel rooms as offices during the day, and most of you will have had that experience, why can't we use offices as places to sleep at night? A New York loft is equally as good as an office or as an apartment. If we do things like that, we can move that 30% up to maybe 80% without too much difficulty. Huge cost savings, huge carbon savings. In the future, and a bit like the previous idea, we may have no more leases. We may have EasyJet type suppliers of building space. You pay less when nobody particularly wants it, you pay more in peak times. So it's a game changer. Use spacewell.com. Deeply disruptive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Keep your seat warm for you. Thank you very much, Chris. Andy, what do you think of this idea? If we're not going to build a new built environment, how can we sort of rebuild and reuse the one we've got? What do you think?
Well, this takes the flexible office design to the ultimate stage where it can be used by anybody and anyone at any time for anything, which I think is an extremely pertinent issue at the moment, given the underuse of space that we have in our towns and cities. The work that's been done on trying to reinvigorate the town centres, for example, by Porteous initiative is a case in point. How successful will that be? Has it got an ability to survive the sort of internet revolution? My view about this is that we really are onto something here. I think that the figure is 27% of people are in some way self-employed in the country at the moment. A lot of people operating in their own businesses. The other thing about this is that it is actually happening already. We've, as a practice, carried out a scheme in Manchester, close to Media City, again facilitated by the local authority, to create seed corn business opportunities where people can come and go and rent out space and use as much or as little space as possible. And we're also looking at some of the redundant retail space in Leeds, lots of dockland opportunities where there's a huge amount of redundant space. So I think this really does have a great opportunity. I think there are clearly some challenges in terms of how you might scale this up, and I think a portal will obviously help. I think there are a lot of people operating individually as businesses that would gain hugely from more information about flexible space in their area. I think it's the issue around changing office to residential has been well rehearsed. I do feel that there are some challenges there in terms of how that works in terms of creating truly sustainable developments and where they're located and whether they're well serviced or not. So I think there's some challenges around that, but all in all, I think it's an exciting proposition.
Thank you, Andy. Paul, you've run big companies, you're on the board of big companies with big head offices and so on. Can you imagine a time when actually you don't have to have big head offices anymore, but actually you could have your staff scattered around the country working in local offices of a high quality?
I actually do. I think this could be a real game changer. I'm not quite sure I'd go quite into the bedrooms at night offices during the day, but large companies, it's a little bit like the move to decentralized energy. You know, we used to do everything centrally. Why can't you do it decentralized? I certainly know in my past company, we had literally thousands of people driving millions of miles between large office locations. So I think there's really something in this. And in fact, I'll go further. I can give you a launch customer for this. I was with Francis Maud last week, the Cabinet Office Minister, and he was telling me it's taken him 2 years to find that the government occupies 189 different offices just in the city of Bristol alone. So, you know, maybe if you go and talk to Francis, you'll get a launch customer for this service. I'm sure he would snap it up.
Wow. Okay. Thank you very much for that. I'm keen to open this up to the audience, and as I've said, and more than happy to take other comments from our expert listeners, from our presenters, of course. Obviously, do you know, if you want to direct a question at an individual, obviously please do so. It'd be good if in the time-honoured tradition you could say who you are and where you're from. We've got a couple of roving microphones. I do want to, again, re-emphasise that, you know, we've got some interesting ideas here. These are the ones that were selected by the participants in the project. These people voted with their feet. They ended up backing ideas that excited them. There were many others. There were other commercial sector ideas and so on. And in particular, I would draw your attention once again to this area. It figures on page 17 of the report, which highlights the key insights, which, as I say, go beyond the individual ideas and into much broader trends. These are around collaboration, around customers at the centre, about spaces flexible, communities, and about finance and the way that that's changing. These are quite profound insights that could cut across many parts of the sector and indeed do in some of the ideas. And of course there is an electronic version of this report which you'll be able to download that has embedded links and embedded video, which is terribly exciting for you to look at when you're back in your offices and want to share it with your colleagues. So I want to open it up now. There are a few people I'm going to pick on. But can I just sort of see a first few hands of who would like to comment or throw in a question to get us going? Down the front here. I'll come to, and I'll take a 2 or 3 at a time. So Paul and then Andy.
Yes, Paul Everall, LABC. 5 great ideas. Look forward to hearing how you suggest collectively we can take this forward. The one thought I would add is local authorities. I was a little surprised there was no mention of them in the first presentation on community collaboration. I just wanted to remind you that local authorities should be part of the solution and not part of the problem. They're sometimes seen as the problem in relation to planning, etc. But they do have responsibilities under the local government legislation for community planning. I just agreed on top of my day job to chair a new West Dorset partnership where I live, which is all about community planning. And they should be key players in taking that first idea forward.
Thank you.
Andy Atkins from Friends of the Earth. First of all, absolutely delighted to see those ideas. They sound really, really exciting. I really hope they flourish. I have a couple of concerns and a question, which I'll put particularly around the community collaborators one, if I may. So again, I'm really excited to see this sort of low carbon agenda going through all of these. But my question is, what else do you think the government needs to do to see a massive rollout of community energy? You've talked about getting money, let's say, from the Green Investment Bank. We would certainly support that. But I wonder what else you think needs to happen. My concern is this. It's just launched, the government's just launched its energy bill. It's massively focused on a rollout of new big bits of kit, gas and nuclear in particular, to some extent renewables, although that would be big bits of renewable like offshore wind. There's next to nothing in it on energy efficiency or community. Unless we do something really very, very fast, is my concern, to change that draft bill, your project will remain a great idea that is a real minority interest and doesn't fulfil the role it really could and should play in UK's energy mix. Am I being too depressing? Have you got no things I don't know?
Thanks. Thanks, Andy. Can I take one more? Gentleman there, second row.
Hi, Graham Hilton from the Alliance for Sustainable Building Products. I was just a little bit disturbed by the implication in Mark from Barrett's comments about self-build. It fits in with an assumption in the government's approach to BIM that building is solely delivered by builders. And I think there's an implication there that the supply chain only really works when the building companies are arbiters of product, and that they choose the best products. My personal experience is that invariably they value engineer those best products out of the system, and that we end up with shoddy products assembled in a shoddy way. Is that everybody else's experience?
Thank you very much. Okay, so a question there about the role of local authorities. Obviously, what should government be doing to create the enabling conditions for community energy schemes to flourish? Challenge there, do we value engineer out some of the best products in our buildings? I guess obvious contenders here are Paul, having run a large energy company, indeed for that matter Mark too. Mark, perhaps on the local authorities perhaps and the builders question. Paul, should we start with you?
Okay, I think I can probably say things that now I'm unencumbered with being a CEO that I couldn't say before, and I think we're seeing the government's energy policy probably unravelling day by day as we go forward, if I'm brutally honest. And the problem is, whilst we stick with the facade of Plan A, we aren't working on Plan B, and I think we need to start working on Plan B quite quickly. I think the issue on community schemes, distributed energy, is how we get the right financing in place. And I think that needs a grown-up discussion with the finance industry. That's what's stopping the Green Deal. The problem with the Green Deal, it's a lot of relatively small value loans to maybe not terribly creditworthy customers, and the administration of it, and frankly, it's going to go nowhere. We need to think much bigger and have much more critical mass around, be it energy efficiency, be it community energy. And I think this is where local authorities actually do come in, to responding to the other gentleman, that if we can get local authorities, the financial communities and energy companies working together, we start to see, I think, some critical mass that could allow us to go forward.
Thanks, Paul. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think the local authority point is a critical one, and you know, I often say that what we really need to make these schemes work is local leadership, and absolutely local authorities are best placed to do that. You know, they are involved in the planning system, they represent the local community, they actually have, you know, they have the ability to bring the local community together, and it needs that, because otherwise what you need is one vocal person in the community that sort of creates it. And I think the reality is you need leaders to make this stuff happen. So I absolutely agree. And there are some great local authorities and great leaders out there, and there's an awful lot that it's probably not on the agenda yet. So it'd be good to see that move. The supply chain point, I'll respond to. I mean, the reality is that for the building industry today, most of the innovation comes from our supply chain. Let me be absolutely clear. We work with our supply chain all the time to work out how do we get to code level 5 or 6, you know, how do we deliver the energy solutions that we're going to need for the future. And I constantly talk to the big suppliers that we use face to face to try and get them to tell us how we can do our job better. We're systems integrators. We take their components and we assemble them, hopefully to provide a product that is built to current standards and therefore of a high quality. The reference I made to new build is that I honestly believe that if you're really going to make this come together, you need companies that provide, I don't mean kits because that sounds terrible, but a solution. So here's a solution, and you know, I remember the holiday in Australia where I could see, you know, Australia is obviously somewhere where you can buy those sort of houses at a supermarket. That's what I was talking about. I want that supply chain. I mean, Scandinavia, yes, you've got similar solutions, but you need that supply chain to operate here, and it doesn't really operate. I mean, when you see Grand Designs, they normally import from Scandinavia today. So we need that supply chain here. And actually, I think our supply chain is more than capable of stepping up to it. And we may well be one of those systems integrators for those sort of solutions. But I do think that we have to recognise it doesn't exist in this country today.
Thanks, Mark. Andy, did you want to pick up on that point, perhaps both about the supply chain and also perhaps the role of local authorities in this?
Yeah, I mean, building on what Mark is saying, you do have some sophisticated systems in Scandinavia which are slowly working their way into the UK, and I think you will see a sort of a pressure within the industry to build more sophisticated components. It's long been the case that we've had to get the best triple glazed units from overseas, and it's about time we built those here. And coupled with the agenda for growth, you know, I would have thought that through tax breaks or incentives in terms of start-up businesses is a real opportunity for the UK. In terms of the local authority, I think, I mean, this cuts right across all of the initiatives, I think, that I think whilst I welcome the sort of customer focus and I welcome the self-help, the build and the self-start-up nature of this. At the end of the day, the public sector do have a role to play, and it's about what is that role, and that might be to do with underwriting risk, it might be to do with enabling, it might be to do with regulating, but I think right across the piece, in terms of discussions this morning, I think we need to see where does the public sector fit in this.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to come and get a few more questions, a few more comments. I want to come and flush Peter out in a moment, if I may, to tell you a bit more about the Genie and what are some of the key lessons that we're getting from that. So I don't know if we can get a microphone down to Peter in the front. Just while that's getting there, I just want to, something I want to, in a sense, challenge myself with and my colleagues, which is, in thinking, as I said at the beginning, about when you think about, okay, what do these ideas add up to? What could they add up to? How much of a game changer is this or not? One of the things that I remember talking to Ed Miliband about in his last job, in the last government, and indeed Greg Barker in his new job, was about how you create sufficient certainty in a market that the industry will mobilise, invest, innovate, deliver, using quite often policy and regulation. But what you have to do is get the balance right so that the signal is there, sufficiently strong that the industry can mobilise, it can justify a response, but you present a solution before the regulatory stick strikes and actually hits, the user. And we've seen a bit of that in the Zero Carbon New Homes agenda, the setting of a 10-year trajectory. The industry is mobilised, had a few bumps in the road, but it has mobilised and it is in the process of delivering. We've had discussions about what is necessary to create the same sort of confidence around the Green Deal. Do we need to set regulated minimum standards over a period of time that shows the industry that we're dead serious about this, that the government is dead serious about this? If you take the Great Homes No Hassle idea, one of the starting points is we've got 26 million homes that are still going to be standing and occupied in 2050. Is it just going and knocking on at a door at a time? Is that going to be enough? Are we going to get as far as we need in terms of cutting carbon emissions from those homes one at a time? Or do we almost need to go in and drug people, and while they're asleep, we go in, take over their homes, retrofit them, and it's all done by the time they wake up? And in a sense, that's what I see as some of the potential of Great Home No Hassle, which is if you can offer people a solution that's sufficiently attractive to say, actually, give me your home, I'll look after your home for you, you get all the benefits, but we'll take away the headaches of upgrading your home for you. What could you start to unlock? Peter, tell us a bit about, if you would, a little bit about the Genie and how it relates to this idea.
All right, hi, I'm Peter Walls from Gen 2. Can I just say first, the stuff about society and who enables. One of my hobby horses at the minute is driving me crazy at the bloody minute. Is I think we've given society away. It is not owned by politicians, local or central. It's meant to be all of our society. And I think an unintended consequence over my time working, which has been lengthy, is that we seem to have lost the ability to get righteously indignant about things. And I look at some of those things that we're seeing today and compare, I'm not saying I agree with it, I'm not wishing a dose of violence on any city in the country, but if you look at the feeling of resentment, say about poll tax in 80 and say welfare reform and energy today, and we seem to have got society to sort of step back a bit, and one of the unintended consequences is there's some sort of feeling that someone will do this for us when it should be done by us. And I think I loved the stuff at the start, which seems to imply a greater sense of things being done by people for themselves, and we merely enable them to have the ability and capacity to do that. I think any time we move towards a structural do for you, we weaken the proposition. And I think the traction will come by people getting it. It'll not come by us getting it and doing it to them when they're drugged or asleep. So, but we do that, nonetheless. Sorry, turning back to the Genie. As you know, since you've nicked most of my ideas and put them in your presentation, we started work on the Genie a couple of years ago. It is now through the FSA. It was, as you know from the lunch, we had deliberately restricted to achieve that purpose, because that's the first starting point. Can you get it into the mainstream? I think the mistake the panel make and everybody else makes when they talk about this product is they constantly compare and contrast it to other products and we need a completely separate one. It is not an elastoplast for a broken mortgage, nor is it an elastoplast for a wasteful rental system. It's new, and it stands on its own 2 feet. It is right that people perceive they'd like to be in the owner-occupied space, and this product gives them that. They are an owner. They are not my tenant. I don't go around and do their repairs unless they, of course, are prepared to pay and ask me. And as we've talked about, it has many variations. We're at the process now where people are living contentedly like that. They're refreshed. They don't have either 200 grand's worth of debt or had to pay a deposit and bung their mother with 50 grand's worth of debt. They can trade the product as you and I would experience in our life with its equity participation. We've bought some off Barrett's to work with, to broaden our, because obviously Gento on its own is not going to work. Where am I going with it? It can certainly, I think it needs to simply be an entire market product and not simply work with new houses that Mark may build or indeed I may build. It needs to affect us all in the stock you say is going to be here for forever. So I'm working on that and how to separate into that space. The other great one, I think, for me is that I haven't yet primed up its equity release possibilities, because you can take equity out one direction, you can obviously bring it in the other, and we know where lots of wealth exists in society, coupled with the challenges of not being able to easily access it at the present time. So multiple applications, and with that, you know, the consequences of a monthly fee for gaining access to a home and having the option of a green menu seems much more doable, because you're not going and borrowing the 10 grand to refit a home. You're actually seen as part of just an extended part of a long-term deal, you know, which the Genie product could scope over 30 years. We're almost at the point of got the yield. Well, sorry, we keep getting it and it keeps moving, as you know. It's not that you can't get there the first ask. It's nearly there. And we're hoping to sort of attract structural funding to that quite soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter.
Genie.
Thank you. So a product already out there, attracting 6 new customers a week, average age 26 or 27, I think, compared to the national average of 37. No deposit required compared to 66,000. Interesting. Other comments and questions? I did see some hands before. Yes, a couple in the middle there.
John Napier, architect and university lecturer at the moment. I'd like to question the assumption that you made at the beginning, which I think is a diplomatic assumption that you should make, of the 80% of the homes being already here. If we look at location, energy efficiency and convenience of the vast tracts of Victorian houses and semi-detached suburban houses, would you like to reconfirm your assumption on that basis?
Okay, another common question? Behind you, actually.
Hello, my name's Rafe Bertram from Foster & Partners, architects and designers. My question's about that last word, the resource-constrained world, because I think everything we've spoken about is about the UK, and if there's a UK industry plan for growth, I'd be struck if it didn't have a large international component to it about products and services globally. And I'm sure the panel, I'm sure the working party thought a lot about the international standpoint, and I'm just wondering if they could share a little bit about the UK's plan for growth had to do with the international market.
Okay, thank you. Was there one more? Manish there?
Hi, Manish from Marks & Spencer. First of all, Paul and the team and everyone who participated, congratulations on presenting something in such an engaging way. So it's excellent that. My question's about actually the common theme throughout the 5 ideas, which is the consumer and the community. And I'd like to put it to Ed, I'd like to put it to Sally, who's obviously got some experience of this, which is how do we communicate effectively about these ideas to the consumer so they really get it? Because it's only if they get it are they going to act upon it.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, Andy, did you want to kick off?
No, I just just wanted to make sure I contributed to that particular question, so I'll wait my turn.
Well, go ahead.
Okay, fine. I mean, I thought one of the most exciting propositions, I was sorry that I didn't have a chance to contribute to the discussion around it, was what Sally was talking about. And I think that there is this whole issue for the industry about customer awareness that we just simply haven't cracked. And we're aware as professionals about the need for low carbon economy. We're aware of the issues around how we design our products and what our products are all about. But very little information is out there for the consumer. And I thought Sally could have taken her idea maybe just a little bit further and included all sorts of issues around informing about metrics, about understanding what the nature of the space that people are buying is, what their air tightness is, in very simple terms that helps inform the consumer. So I really like the idea, and I think that the Mori or some sort of organisation that could sort of link up with this ought to be encouraged straight away, because that's the biggest, for me, the biggest issue is consumer awareness of product.
Thank you, Andy. Ed, you'd like to pick up on as a consumer point. I'm not sure whether on the international point you would have a view or not. I don't want to talk you into having one if you haven't, but pick up the consumer one if you would.
I've probably got an opinion on everything. I will stick to the communications bit. I mean, I'm going to refer to people as well rather than consumers. I find the word rather awkward. But again, I think the thing here is about the kind of superior offer. You know, there's such a dissatisfaction with the status quo in all sorts of spheres of life now that actually if you've got a proposition which is superior, better, bolder, braver, okay, there's always going to be some initial suspicion, but you know, there is possibility for industry leadership to actually give people something genuinely, tangibly different, which they feel is going to be more engaging and exciting. And I think that's massively invigorating for all of us, and it certainly should be. You know, and I always end up quoting Lord Reith, the founder of the BBC. You know, so the job of the BBC is not to give the people what they want, but to give them what they don't yet know they want. And that's where this leap forward of consumer, you know, getting away from some sort of consumer sovereignty and saying actually they always know what they want. Actually, some of these propositions here, people wouldn't tell you that was what they wanted or what they were after in a survey. So you need to have the boldness to take a step forward. And I think if you put people at the heart of property, whether it's about renting, purchasing, building communities or whatever, the profit will come. And you know, many of the ideas we've talked about today may not be radically innovative, but they are transformative at scale. And that's the exciting bit. You know, a lot of these things, as I said earlier, have been simmering along. And you know, that's the way you capture the public imagination, because there's a huge, massively positive vision which sits underneath all of these things, which has got people at the heart of it. And if you do that, your businesses and your industry will recover and thrive.
Thank you, Ed. Mark, are you in a position to validate my assertion about 80% by 2050? As I'm racking my brains, and from memory, I think the original source of that for me personally was some research done by the EST, and I think it's really the result of the rate of new build, the rate of demolition, and we can extrapolate from that. Is that broadly right?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it was in the IGT document, and I mean, there's 26 million homes at the moment. You can work out what the rate of new build, you know how many you're knocking down, and effectively you can do the maths. And it varies between 75 and 80 depending on the assumptions you make. I mean, for example, you know, one of my great ideas, of course, is to knock all the old stuff down and rebuild, but I would say that, wouldn't I? That would change the percentage. Probably stretch the industry a bit, but I mean the reality is, yeah, it is just maths, and it is the fact that you know so much of what we have today we'll be living in 2050.
Yeah, thank you. And there is a fascinating bit of work I also recall, which I think was led by LSE, London School of Economics, Professor Anne Power, and worked with Lizzie Chatterjee to look at actually the true cost of demolition, which I think really does push back on the argument, well, actually, why don't we pull down a lot more of the leaky stuff and replace it with nice, efficient new stuff? The actual real cost, and I'm talking about the real economic and the real social cost of doing so, and indeed the environmental cost in terms of embodied energy and so on, is pretty massive. But it's a debate that rumbles on nonetheless. I'm not sure, I don't know if anybody's dying to comment on the international piece, or Sally, did you want to comment on one of the other comments?
On the
customer,
piece.
please do.
Yeah. I could have talked all morning about my idea, but Paul said I couldn't. So apologies for the fact that some people are picking up on things where there are gaps. And I'd be more than happy to talk about that afterwards. People are absolutely at the heart of the idea that I described. And not only putting people at the heart, but seeing each person as an individual. So it is not in any way that we can go in and talk to people about you will save money, or you will save the planet, or your kids will be warmer, or your back will be better. It is, each person is an individual, and their circumstances are individual. We've done a Green Deal pilot, so I was interested to hear that somebody said maybe Green Deal won't come off at scale. When we asked people in social housing, in our stock, would you like to pay a small charge for energy efficiency measures, 79% of people said yes. And in the first month, 84% of people have paid their charges. So I do think there's traction in this if you talk to people in the right way. And the way that we've done that is we haven't sent letters, we've gone and knocked on their doors, and we've had a conversation with them. And if they didn't get it the first time round, we said, well, if you want to bring your mum or your sister or your friend, and we'll have another chat. So we spent time with them, which leads me to my last point, which is connected to what Ed said about the profit will follow. Maybe we shouldn't expect massive amounts of profit for this. This is the right thing to do. We are all people who would expect time to be given to us for our final solution to be presented to us. And maybe we need to be a little bit less greedy about what level of profit we expect.
Thank you, Sally. Jane, did you want to? Yep, please.
It was also on the customer choice, but picking up on some of these type of supply chain issues. I think absolutely fundamental to all these ones, and I'm really pleased that a lot of people have brought this out, is getting people closer to the process will start taking the lid off the whole problem of feeling out of control. In our surveys of residents, we get phenomenal satisfaction rates, and they're absolutely true, 93% satisfaction. And I have say at the beginning, we're really, really proud of this, but I also say that's because you're so glad to get a social home. Of course, you're overwhelmingly satisfied. And what we see is a lot of it could be a lot better. And actually, this is a very true story. But the day before yesterday, I had somebody on the phone who was a whistleblower who's saying, look, on my little site, it's a sort of 3 or 4 house site. I don't believe you're going to hit any of the standards. I don't think it's going to last more than a year. It's a really, really poor quality product. What do I do? And you know, so we went through what could be done. But I think these proposals will sort of get people much closer to seeing, you know, being responsible, taking control of what you can do, and not really being satisfied. And what you were talking about, people getting angry and not saying it's okay to have a house that falls apart after 6 months, or in our case, a home that's a sort of sea of tarmac. You know, I have to admit, we do see them, and we still get these fantastic satisfaction rates. So I think the thing about putting the customer in control can unlock it. And I know that house builders, you know, take a lot of hit, and I think they're not the same all over. You know, Mark, you know, you play a different game, and there's many that play a different game, but there's also many that play the old game. And that's the ones, you know, the little homes, the 4 or 5 homes which are covering the country. You know, we've got to make them good enough, and I don't believe they are good enough, and putting customers at the core can, people at the core can sort of unlock that.
Thank you, Jane. I'm going to have to move us on. I'm very conscious of time, and we're going to hear from Dan Labad in just a couple of moments. We started 5 minutes late. I'm going to borrow 5 minutes from your coffee break afterwards, if you'll indulge me. I would like just to get a quick comment, if I may, from 2 people who I think their day job is closely linked to innovation in the sector, and one of those is Ian Meikle from the Technology Strategy Board, who supported this project, and I'd be interested in just your thoughts now about what this tells us about where we need to be going. And I'd also like, if possible, a quick comment from Paul Morell, who will be hanging up his hat in the autumn after 3 years as Chief Government Advisor in this sector. Any headline thoughts that you've got, Paul? Ian.
Yes, Ian, Technology Strategy. Am I on? Yeah. We're delighted to be one of the funders of this programme. It's great to see 5 good ideas come out here, potentially some sub-ideas from it, and maybe it's even triggered some further thoughts for you on other ideas as your sort of brain's been whirring this morning. At the Technology Strategy Board, as Paul sort of prompted, you know, we drive innovation, as it says on our sort of catchphrase there. What we're really doing is helping provide the bridge between, you know, the trajectory of where we're going with government policy and where industry is trying to take us. Oh, yes, that's right. It works much better, much closer, doesn't it? So, I mean, one of the questions that Paul asked me before today was, you know, where might we take this? You know, could there possibly be some further TSB funding after today? And it was rather hard to say, you know, before we turned up today, you know, what the challenge is, because we've got to look at what the innovation challenge is, okay? So I think one of the things that I said was, let's have a look what the feedback is today. Let's see what encouragement there is from industry. We need industry people to take innovation ideas forward. It's not for us to take the ideas forward. It needs to come from the room. And I think the important thing that we need to look at is unpick the ideas and understand what the blockages are and what the innovation is that could help unblock those blockages. So maybe it's looking at planning, maybe it's looking at finance, maybe we need more accurate modelling tools to tell us when we do this you design and build thing, you know, that the house is actually going to perform to the standards and we can actually set a price. Maybe we need to look, and we need to drill down to that next level of detail to see kind of where we take the innovation from there. So I'm very encouraged today. I think the important thing is that you give your feedback to Paul, and then we can work with Paul and understand where those innovation challenges are.
Thank you very much, Ian, and a very good plug. You all have, of course, feedback forms. It would be terrific if you could give us some feedback, both about this morning's event, but also the substance of the project. The report will also take you through to our website and the section of there where we'll be creating further discussion around this project very soon. Paul, can we get a microphone round to Paul?
I have.
You've got one.
Yeah. Thanks for the 1 minute notice, Paul. I think probably conclusion number one of the IGT report was how about a plan? And in the absence of a plan, nothing's going to happen. There's some kind of long-term framework of where we might find the answers to this massive problem, to which we know may be less than half the answer at the moment. And so there can't be too many ideas. I think just responding to the particular ideas that are coming up, they vary to me from those where I would just say, so whose permission do you need? You know, if an idea goes up and it says, look, problem one is access to capital, then either it's not a very good idea or there's a market failure. So an obvious question that arises out of every idea is, whose permission do you need, as I say? And I think some of them then need a big bit of permission. Now, I've long had a theory that community energy might start to repay many of the losses of economy of scale by the fact that people will react differently to energy if they own it. As long as you don't create a perverse incentive that then becomes a source of income for them and they want lots of energy to be consumed again. But it's slightly disingenuous to compare that 27 million with 7 billion when you're talking about 1 gigawatt. So I'd be really interested in, you know, with the idea of the point that you made in your opening speech, really, just how much do these ideas scale up? And therefore, how much do they need massive policy decisions to unlock them? And how many of them are just things that you should just go out and do, or could do, by making a market on your own? And I think that the danger of things that lack scale is well, it's kind of ambivalent, really. Some politicians don't like things that lack scale because they're looking for a big solution. They've got 60, 70 million people to look after. Some like things that lack scale because they want to confuse activity with a genuine long-term solution. So they'll rush off and do something that never has scale but doesn't cost much. So I think all the time you have to look at whose permission you need and the extent to which what you're looking at is something that has a long-term scale solution. And I think the whole idea of energy, community energy in the context of a large-scale plan that doesn't look like working is fascinating, but needs real work about how it might scale up and how much of the answer to the problem it might be.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. Okay, I'd like to invite Dan Labad, Chairman of the UK Green Building Council, but is also here really principally as co-chair of the Green Construction Board, to share a couple of thoughts.
Thank you, Paul. Everyone's been sitting down for quite some time, so I'll try to keep it short. Where to begin? I am sitting here wearing several hats, but as I was listening to the morning, and I didn't have a chance to read the report before today, I thought I'd come up here and do two things. One, probably put an industry hat on today, and two, come from a position of what might seem like idealism, but something that I firmly believe in as an industry leader. We joined the UK Green Building Council 5 or 6 years ago, and we're involved in them all around the world for a number of reasons. One, this agenda is confusing and it's highly complex. Two, nobody has a monopoly on ideas. And three, we need to be part of the change. There is an additional element that comes in today, and that is that change is absolutely upon us. And I want to come back to that point in a moment. When we hear some of the issues that come out of the morning and some of the ideas, and there were too many to mention here, but change is upon us. I also sense that what's coming through is this is a humanitarian challenge before it's a market opportunity. We need to put people at the centre of property. The construction industry as we know it is dead. We need to collaborate like we've never collaborated before, and it's up to us. And I thought about this in the context of the way we write strategy and business plans in both industry, government, and for that matter, the third sector. And I think about our own business. And I look at the discussion today and I think to myself, do we ask these ideas of ourselves as we're writing our business strategy? Or if we do ask those ideas, when it comes to the crunch of actually the business plan turning into reality, do those ideas come into the business plan in any real way? And if I was being honest with myself, the answer would be no. And that's a real interesting dilemma because the world we live in outside of UK PLC is changing like it's never changed before. And we've mentioned some of those things today. The growth agenda. We need to grow, we need to survive and prosper from an economic perspective. We have the carbon challenge, we have resource constraints, and we have technology changing like never before. And a good example of that is what's happening on the high streets at the moment. And things that you notice today is the shifts of change are happening a lot faster and in a lot more abrupt a way than was 10 years ago. So if I think I'm writing a strategy for my business or my government department or my NGO, where are we going to be in 10 years? I can't think back where were we in 2002 because 2022 is going to look exponentially different on a relative basis. And these are important factors because if we're going to change as an industry, we need to think very, very differently. And I think that what today is about is, yes, about the ideas that have come through, but when I read the background to the document, I note here it says, we're not suggesting that this report represents a comprehensive business plan for the whole industry. Now, ultimately, you might look at some of these ideas today, some of them will twig, some of them won't, but I put a different proposition forward. I think this report presents an alternate philosophy for the whole industry to think differently, to ask ourselves different questions in a different way, and make sure that those questions and that informed debate and these conversations come back into the way that we actually do business. And I think there is some low-lying fruit. I think in the ideas that have come through today, there are some fantastic streams of wisdom that we can bring into our everyday. I think somebody mentioned the supply chain and how as an industry over the last 30 years we've commoditized our supply chain, and we've got real opportunity to reinvigorate that by turning the way we do business on its head. There are a few ideas. So what I encourage you to do today is take today as the beginning of a conversation as to how we can do business differently, and to use your engagement with what today is about, the UK Green Building Council, the Green Construction Board and other industry bodies to help you understand the agenda in order to take it back into your business and to think differently and to be bold. No one's underestimating the challenge. There's a huge challenge out there, but what I can say is this, is in 10 years, many of us will be out of business if we don't start to actually take this seriously. So on that note, I'd also like to thank everybody involved today and the UK Green Building Council and the team for what has, I think, been an inspiring couple of hours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Dan. I was reminded, going through this process over the last few months by colleagues from 100% Open and others, that the reason for, as part of a planning process of looking as far as you can into the future, is not to think, hey, what might life be like in the future? It's to make you think about how you should be starting to do things differently today. And that's the point. I think Paul was one of a number of people who talked about scale. And that applies in a number of different ways to this project. Yes, it's about the scalability of the ideas. It's about the scale of the challenge and whether or not we're fiddling at the edges or really seizing the ball by the horns. There's another point about scale I'd like to just leave you with, though, which is that this project for us was a reasonably large-scale undertaking. We're a team of 15 people in our office. We've, of course, got many very committed members who put in a hell of a lot of time and effort and energy. And I want to thank all of those 50 people and others who supported that process. But actually, a few days, 50 people, over 6 months in an industry of this size is nothing in terms of scale. And if you can generate these number of insights and these number of interesting ideas, that number of people in that number of days, what's the potential? So one of the things we're very keen to hear is whether or not you would like us to be more involved in this sort of process going forward. Would you like us to do more to facilitate these sorts of discussions, these sorts of opportunities? It's very gratifying that some of our, indeed, biggest members have already come to us and said, we want to replicate this process in our own organisations. Can you share with us more how you went about it? We're happy to do that. We're happy to bring together people from across the building life cycle and the supply chain, if that's what you want us to do, because you pay our salaries, so you get to tell us what to do. So please do give us the feedback on the forums today, but also through the website and the forum that we're going to create there. I, of course, have got a number of thank yous I must go through. I want to thank all of our expert listeners very much. I'm sorry I didn't give you more opportunities to comment on more ideas, but time was tight. I want to thank all of our presenters, representatives of much bigger teams, this group of 50 people who have put in a hell of a lot of time and effort, typically in their own time, over the last 6 months. A very big thank you to them. Of course, cue the slide, I want to thank once again our sponsors, Aggregate Industries, E.ON, Heathrow Airport, Mitsubishi Electric and Technology Strategy Board, without whom we couldn't have run this project. I hope we have persuaded Technology Strategy Board. They may want to encourage us further. We'll look forward to that discussion. Thanks to Dan, and thanks to the Minister, Mark Priss, for his words of support as well. Thank you all for sitting very quietly in a rather warm room. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks very much.